Hey, good morning, Super Peeps. We're going to finish up chapter 11. We're going to talk about how Indiana struggled to desegregate their schools. So let's just start at the end into the 20th century. Um, let's look at the makeup of the Hoosier population, and African Americans only made up 5% of the population. So desegregation, racial equality was not a huge priority for Hoosiers. And then you look into the 1920s and you've got the KKK coming in and with prominent membership. And so they absolutely set up segregated schools. And World War II happens and World War I happens, and you've got these soldiers coming back who are being treated as second class citizens. And there's even a book that's on the laws. I said that totally backwards. There's a law on the books that allowed Indiana to segregate their schools. So if we look at it timeline-wise, in 1896, you had Plessy versus Ferguson, where the guy wouldn't get off the car, and the Supreme Court said segregation is legal. Well, segregation is going to be legal until 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education, where this little black girl named Linda Brown, her parents wanted her to stay at her neighborhood school, but she couldn't because it was a white school, and so they were busing her out. So they sue, it goes to the Supreme Court, and they say, you know what? Segregation is now illegal. Boom, right? But 5 years before that, Indiana passes this Indiana School Desegregation Act, and they said, you know what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to desegregate. Okay, well, what happens if we don't? Nothing. I have no penalty for you. Okay. And so nothing really happened in Indiana, even with that passage of the Desegregation Act. Crazy. So they tried, but nobody listened because there was no penalty. We did have all black schools in Indiana. There was one in Gary, Evansville, and a very famous one, Crispus Attucks High School in Indy. And Crispus Attucks gets its name from the young man that was shot, and that was supposedly the shot that started the Boston Massacre. Go back to your American history days. Very good at basketball, these schools were, but the IHSAA would not allow them to play in any state tournament until World War II was over. Crispus Attucks was open in 1927, and you can see here by the numbers that the school could only hold 1,000, but yet they had 1,300 enrolled. So definitely not, it's separate, but what's it equal? I think not. Crispus Attucks became the object for curiosity, prejudice, and racial threats. A student recalled, it was like we were from outer space. I mean, I would hear their comments to each other. Look at that one, he's really black. And that one, she's as light as my mother's coffee. So definitely racial tensions. The coach for Crispus Attucks was Ray Crow. You can see here 6 regional championships, 4 semi-state championships, back-to-back state titles. 56, the first team to go undefeated, 31-0. Incredible record, okay? Now I want to take you back to the Milan victory. Remember when the small school beat Muncie Central, the movie Hoosiers? It said that even though they had this incredible season, okay, the Tigers did not receive any statewide attention like Milan did. It said when Milan won the state championship, they got to ride around all the squares in Indy, all through the downtown. And when it was an all-black school, city officials thought that these black people would terrorize the city. We can't have them congregating around our circle monument. We will take them back to their neighborhood, and the police escorted us there. So huge celebration for Milan, not so much for Crispus Attucks Tigers. And they were quoted at being the most invincible team this basketball crazed state had seen. And it says right here in this little box, the Crispus Attucks basketball team members celebrate their state championship win in 1956 on the court of Butler University's field house and in a police escorted ride from the field house to their neighborhood. So they did not get that escort and trip around Indy. All right, Bobby Plump, who did the game-winning shot for Milan, said what they were able to accomplish is as significant as anything that's ever been done in this state's illustrious basketball history. There's nothing that I can say, there's nothing you will hear, there's nothing you can write that can possibly get to the depth of what they had to go through to accomplish everything they did. It was a big feat. So it was incredible from my understanding. If you're a basketball peep, you probably know this story. So pretty cool. So let's get into busing, the busing issues. Whites were getting transferred out of schools that had a large Black population, and Blacks would transfer out of schools where Blacks were the minority. So you had all this transferring of students. Oh, there's too many Blacks, I've got to get out. Oh, there's not very many Blacks, too many whites, I've got to get out. So the state law wasn't working. That was passed in 49, and Brown versus Board of Education National Supreme Court ruling was not working. Cities found ways around keeping their schools segregated. The northern cities were the first to integrate, and Gary, Indiana actually created a law that said, you're not moving your school. You're not moving. If this is your school, this is where you live, that's where you're going, and you're not going to be bussed out. So kudos to Gary, Indiana, right? And it's said by the 1950s, Indianapolis and Evansville were some few large cities in the north that would not integrate. It said here, a historian stated, Indianapolis fought school desegregation with a ferocity rarely matched by any other northern city. They straight up did not want their schools to be desegregated. Okay. So in 1971 now, there was a federal judge named Hugh Dillon. And this is what he said about the Indianapolis School Board. Through the years, they have consistently employed policies and practices causing and maintaining racial segregation. Everything within their power to keep those schools segregated. So what he ended up doing is he ordered desegregation to happen and said Black students could be bused to Marion County suburban schools. So we're putting the African Americans on buses and busing them out to suburban schools, which were white schools. 73, the first buses began carrying Black students away from their inner city schools. The thing of it is no white students were bused in. And so Black parents were upset because they're like, seriously, our neighborhood schools they're deteriorating. No one's here. And then the kids were bused so far away from home, they spent most of their day on the bus. And then at that point, the parents are like, really, are the white schools that much better? So there's a huge desegregation issue. And as you go up, that's my mean face for my African-American parents who are upset. And they should have been. Nobody wants their kids on buses for over an hour. Bill Garrett is also another famous basketball guy. He was the first African-American to play on IU's court in 1947. And again, if you're a basketball peep, you know this guy. All right. I'm going to stop there, guys.